All right, so the time has come. You have decided you need to buy a Nintendo Switch 2. Maybe. Maybe that's not what you need. Maybe you need a Nintendo Switch 1. If you don't have one already, it's an option. And of course, there's the Steam Deck, all the other handheld PCs, but in this video today, we are gonna discuss which one of those things is gonna be right for you. Okay, so there are a lot of different scenarios in which you might be looking at a Nintendo Switch 2. So we're gonna go over a bunch of them here, whether you have a Switch 1 right now and you're wondering if you should upgrade, maybe you don't have a Switch at all and you're thinking, maybe I should buy a Switch 2, or should I just get a Switch 1? Or if you're looking at any of the other handheld PCs or consoles for that matter. We're gonna try to cover it all, but we're gonna start, let's just say you are a Switch 1 owner. Maybe somebody who's not exactly sold on the Switch 2 just yet. Should you upgrade? Now, obviously the cost is something we gotta talk about here. We're talking about $450 or $500 if you want the new Mario Kart with it. That's a pretty substantial jump in price considering we're at $300 and $350 for the original Switch, but you are getting a lot more power with this one, and it has been 8 years, so the math works out, and for what you're getting, it is definitely worth the upgrade if that's the type of stuff that you're interested in. If you still have a Nintendo Switch that has, maybe let's say a big library of backlog games that you haven't played yet, that is something you should definitely think about, because you don't necessarily have to get a Switch 2 right now, although there are some reasons you may want to go right now. We'll get to that in a little bit though, but you don't have to do it right now. You can play your Switch 1 for probably a long time with all of those backlog games, because there's only a handful of them right at launch that are actually going to take any type of significant help, like any upgrades from the Switch 2. There's a small list that they're given for free, and then there are 4 or 5 games that are gonna have upgrades that are gonna be paid. So some of these are gonna be $10 upgrades, some of them are gonna be $20 upgrades that also have DLC included. It's kind of all over the place with the structure of all that stuff, so you gotta kind of pay attention to which games you might wanna play now that aren't even gonna be upgraded. There are plenty of games on the Switch 1 that run just fine on that hardware, especially the first party Nintendo stuff. The later ones, yeah, they started to have a little bit of trouble, but if you're not somebody who's worried about frame rates and resolution all that much, you just want to play the games, upgrading to a Switch 2 right now probably isn't 100% necessary. You're gonna get a little bit more life out of your Switch 1 or your OLED or your Lite, whatever it is you have, as long as the battery's still good, if it holds a charge and you're on the fence about it, play the games you have. There's also 2 other games still to come to the Switch 1. The new Pokemon game is going to be on Switch 1, and Metroid Prime 4 are going to be on Switch 1. So you got 2 brand new games to play right there without even having to upgrade. Now you are not gonna get the, 1080p, 120 frames per second, mouse mode, Metroid Prime 4, but you are gonna be able to play the game, and if Metroid Prime Remaster is anything to go off of, Metroid Prime 4 should look pretty good on the original Switch. I don't know if it's gonna run as well, but it's probably gonna look decent enough. Pokemon, I mean, we saw what the Pokemon games were on Switch 1. They did not run well. I imagine they will run better on Switch 2. The older Pokemon games are getting an upgrade, so those are gonna run better on Switch 2. I imagine this one probably will too, so that's something to think about. But let's talk about it if you don't even have a Switch 1. Maybe you're somebody who's seen the Switch 2, kind of getting caught up in the hype. You see the pre-orders have been going crazy. You're wondering if you're gonna be able to get your hands on one. I would say if you really want one, there are probably gonna be some restocks, and I know there are gonna be some on day one, at least at Targets. That's what they've said online, or that's what's been uncovered online. So you do have a chance to get one on day one without pre-orders. There are probably gonna be pre-orders going back up, but let's say you don't have a Switch at all, you like the Switch 2, maybe don't wanna pay the price. A Switch 1 is a good place to start, especially right now, because the library for Switch 1 is massive. Not only that, you're gonna be able to play all of those games on your Switch 2 if you decide later on to upgrade to the Switch 2. Everything is backwards compatible, so you're gonna be able to go buy a Switch 1, a Lite, an OLED, whatever, play all those games, and then when you're ready for the 2, or maybe you can find a used one, you don't wanna pay the full $450 for it, you're gonna be able to get one, and all those games are just gonna transfer over. You're gonna be able to play them just how you did or better depending on the game. And another thing about it is, you can get a Switch Lite on some place like Facebook Marketplace right now for like $100, and they're usually in pretty good conditions. The one thing you have to watch out for is stick drift. I would say if you're going to buy a Switch Lite from somebody used, or a Switch at all on Facebook Marketplace, make sure you meet them in person. Be very careful about that, but test the sticks. Go into the menu, test the sticks, make sure they don't have drift. If they do, You could probably still buy it, maybe have them knock a few bucks off, but you can replace the sticks pretty easily. I know a lot of people don't want to really get into that, but there are plenty of tutorials out there to show you how to get in there, change the sticks. It's a pretty easy process. But if you don't want to do that, make sure you check them before you pay the person and let them leave. You don't want to get Joy-Cons that already have drift. That's not, it's not gonna be fun for you. Another thing you might want to consider if you don't have a Nintendo Switch at all, and let's say you've decided, okay, I can go ahead and get a Switch 1 right now, and I can get the Switch 2 later. Another thing you should probably just keep in mind is how you're gonna be playing the Switch. If you are going to be playing handheld, then I would suggest a Lite or an OLED. Do not get the original Switch if you're gonna be playing a lot of handheld, but if you do not plan to play handheld at all, obviously a Switch Lite is not gonna be the way to go. You're not gonna be able to dock that whatsoever. I would say look for one of the older Switch units, one of the ones that have the regular screen, not the OLED, because one, you're gonna be able to get those cheaper, and two, you can put it in the dock. You're not gonna have to worry about that old screen looking bad. You're never gonna see it because it's gonna be docked. So that is definitely something to keep in mind as well. If you do decide to go with a Switch V1 or something in that area other than the Switch 2. All right, another question you might have is, should you buy a Switch 2 or a Steam Deck? Now, I'm gonna go ahead and tell you this. If you are watching this video asking that question, the answer is Switch 2. If you already don't know that you want a Steam Deck, that's probably not the way you wanna go. The differences are gonna be pretty dramatic as far as like what you can do with one to the other, but a Switch 2 or a regular Switch is gonna be something that's basically plug and play. It's gonna come with the dock, where the Steam Deck is not gonna come with the dock. You're gonna have to get that separately. You can get them pretty cheap, but it is gonna be an extra added on cost if you wanna play on the TV, and it's not gonna be, you know, the upscaled resolution, kind of like the Switch 2 is gonna be. You're gonna get a lot more performance out of the Switch 2 docked than you are out of the Steam Deck, that's for sure. I had a Steam Deck. I used to try to use it on the TV, but honestly, it really wasn't worth the trouble. There's a lot of stuff you've got to go in and change, and even to get the best performance out of a lot of the games, you're gonna be going into settings and changing a lot of stuff. And if you're somebody who doesn't know a lot about that stuff, maybe you aren't a PC player, that's gonna be something a PC player would be much more comfortable with and understand, you know, changing different things inside about graphics, about frame rates, you know, textures, because essentially on the Steam Deck, you are playing PC games. It's gonna come from your Steam library. Now that is also another thing there that you're gonna wanna remember. If you do have a Steam library, maybe the Steam Deck is the way to go, because obviously you're gonna be able to use all of those games, most of those games, on your Steam Deck as well. Another thing you can do if you have a Steam Deck and a Steam account with a lot of games, you're gonna be able to share that with another person. Your libraries can combine completely. Now I did make sure about this with Jeeb. Before I filmed this video, him and his brother share, they share their Steam libraries. So essentially, when you share your libraries, the two libraries basically just become one. If one of them buys a game, it just goes into the other person's library as well. So you're gonna be able to do that pretty easily. Nintendo has a lot of ways to share games that aren't great. They're not as straightforward as just making two libraries one. They do work, but I just put a video out on that last week. If you haven't watched that, I'll link it at the end so you can check out the game sharing stuff when it comes to the Switch 2 and the Nintendo Switch. But I would say for most people, if you're watching this video wondering, should I get a Steam Deck or a Switch 2, it's probably gonna be either the Switch 2 or, as I just talked about, maybe a Switch 1, depending on which one of those might sound better to you at the time. And obviously there is the other downside to going with something like a Steam Deck or any of the other handheld PCs. You aren't gonna get Nintendo's first party games legally.
That was just a bunch of cheap walk cycles!
It can be done. You know, however you wanna do that, that's up to you. But like I said, if you're asking if you should get a Steam Deck or a Switch, you're probably not gonna be somebody who knows a whole lot about doing that. So if you're looking for first-party games from Nintendo, the Switch is also gonna be the place to do that. So that is basically gonna be the things you need to think about whenever you're trying to decide what the answer to this question is for yourself. Steam Deck, Switch 2, regular Switch, Switch OLED, Switch Lite. Hopefully I've given you enough information that you can make a decision. If you have any questions at all, leave them down in the comments below. I'm gonna link this video here, so if you do decide you wanna go to the Nintendo Switch, you know how to share your games. That is gonna do it for this one, guys. As always, thank you so much for watching this video. Please leave a like. Make sure you're subscribed. We'll see you in the next one.